We were talking about inflammation. I said that most of the time inflammation is a lifesaver that enables our bodies to fend off various disease-causing bacteria, viruses, and parasites. The instant any of these potentially deadly microbes slip into the body, inflammation organizes a defense attack that lays waste to both invaders and any tissue it may have infected. Then just as quickly, the process subsides and healing begins. Every once in a while, however, the whole feverish production doesn't shut down on a cue. Sometimes the problem is a genetic predisposition. Other times, something like smoking or high blood pressure keeps the process going. In any event, inflammation becomes chronic rather than transitory. Inflammation has become one of the hottest area of medical research today. Hardly any week goes by without the publication of another study uncovering the new ways that chronic inflammation does harm to our body. Chronic inflammation destabilizes cholesterol deposits in the coronary arteries, leading to heart attacks and potentially even strokes. It may even foster the proliferation of abnormal cells and facilitate their transformation into cancer. In other words, chronic inflammation may be the engine that drives many of the most feared illnesses of middle and old age. Chronic inflammation fascinates actually a lot of scientists today because it indicates that our body may have, from an evolutionary perspective, become victims of their own success. We evolved as species because of our ability to fight off microbial invaders. These strategies our bodies use for survival were important in a time when we didn't have processing plants to purify, for example, our water, or when we didn't have sewers to protect us. But now that we are living longer, those same inflammatory strategies are more likely to slip beyond our control. Making matters worse, it appears that many of the attributes of a Western lifestyle, such as a diet high in sugar and saturated fats, accompanied by little or no exercise, also make it easier for the body to become inflamed. To understand better, let me draw a picture for you about the basic immunological response, a cascade of events triggered whenever the body is subjected to trauma or injury. Here I am going to discuss few things that you might want to take some notes. Consider a short 101 course in immunology. I think this is important for our discussion tonight, and I promise to lay it down in a very simple language so everybody can understand it. As soon as the splinter slices into your finger, for example, specialized sentinel cells pre-stationed throughout the body alert the immune system to the presence of any bacteria that might have come along for the ride. Sentinel cells are first line of defense in your body, which embed themselves in tissues such as skin. Some of those cells, called mast cells, release chemicals called histamine that makes nearby capillaries leaky. This allows a small amount of plasma to pour out, slowing down invading bacteria, and prepares the way for other faraway immune defenders to easily enter the fray. Meanwhile, another group of sentinels, called macrophages, begin an immediate counterattack and release more chemicals. These chemicals are called cytokines, which are inflammatory markers. These chemicals signal for reinforcement. Soon, wave after wave of immune cells flood the sites, destroying pathogens and damaged tissue alike. There is no carrying the wounded off the battlefield in this war. Doctors call this generalized response to practically any kind of attack innate immunity. Even the bodies of animals as primitive as starfish defend themselves this way. But higher organisms have also developed a more precision-guided defense system that helps direct and intensify the innate response and creates specialized antibodies, custom-made to target specific kinds of bacteria or viruses. This so-called learned immunity is what enables drug companies to develop vaccine against disease like smallpox and the flu. So working in tandem, the innate and learned immunological defenses fight pitch battles until all the invading germs are annihilated. In a final flurry of activity, a last wave of cytokines is released, the inflammatory process recedes, and healing begins. Okay. Problem begins when, for one reason or another, the inflammatory process persists and becomes chronic. The final effects are varied and depends a lot on where in the body the runaway reaction takes hold. Among the first to recognize the broader implications were actually heart doctors, who noticed that inflammation seems to play a key role in cardiovascular disease. Let's talk about the risk factors for chronic inflammation. There are several risk factors which increase the likelihood of establishing and maintaining a low-level inflammatory response. These include first the age factor. In contrast to younger individuals whose level of inflammatory cytokines typically increase only in response to infection or injury, older adults can have consistently elevated levels of several inflammatory cytokines or inflammatory markers. These elevations are observed even in healthy older individuals. While the reasoning for this age-associated increase in inflammatory markers is not thoroughly understood, it may reflect cumulative mitochondrial dysfunction and oxidative damage. So, what are the roles of mitochondria, you might ask? Mitochondria generate chemical energy, similar to the type of energy you get from a battery. The energy made by the mitochondria is in the form of a chemical called ATP. ATP is an energy currency that every cell in our body can use, and it keeps us alive. For example, brain cells need a lot of energy to be able to communicate with each other and also to communicate with parts of the body that may be far away. To do this, substances need to be transported along the cells, which need lots of energy. Muscle fibers also need a lot of energy to help us to move, maintain our posture, and lift objects. So mitochondrial dysfunction results in excess free radical formation in the cells, which we call it oxidative damage, and leads to chronic inflammation. The other risk factor for chronic inflammation is obesity. Fat tissue is an endocrine organ. The endocrine system refers to the collection of glands of an organism that secretes hormones directly into the circulatory system to be carried towards, for example, distant targets. So Fat tissue storing and secreting multiple hormones and cytokines into circulation and affecting metabolism throughout the body. For example, visceral fat or abdominal fat can produce inflammatory molecules at levels sufficient to induce a strong inflammatory response. Visceral fat cells can produce 3 times the amount of an inflammatory molecule as fat cells elsewhere, and in overweight individuals may be producing up to 35% of the total of these inflammatory molecules in the body. Fat tissues can also be infiltrated by macrophages, which secrete pro-inflammatory molecules. By the way, macrophage is a Greek word that means big eater. They are a type of white blood cell that engulfs and digests cellular debris, foreign substances, microbes, cancer cells, and anything else that does not have the type of proteins is specific to the surface of a healthy body cell on its exterior. So this accumulation of macrophages appears to be proportional to body mass index and appear to be a major cause of low-grade systemic inflammation and insulin resistance in obese individuals. What about the role of diet? Diets high in saturated fat are associated with higher pro-inflammatory markers, particularly in diabetics or overweight. This effect is absent in healthy individuals. Diets high in synthetic trans fats such as margarine have been associated with increase in inflammatory markers. The increase in markers of inflammation due to synthetic trans fats may be more pronounced in individuals that are also overweight. General dietary overconsumption is a major contributor to inflammation and other detrimental age-related processes in the modern world. Therefore, eating a calorie-restricted diet is an effective means of relieving physiological stressors. Indeed, several studies show that calorie restriction provides powerful protection against chronic inflammation. I want to go to the role of glucose, but before I go there, let me also tell you about the low sex hormones which cause chronic inflammation. Amongst the sex hormones, amongst their many roles in biology, they also modulate the immune inflammatory responses. The cells that mediate inflammation, such as what we call it the same macrophages and neutrophils, have receptors for estrogen and androgen that enable them to selectively respond to sex hormone levels in many tissues. A good example is a class of macrophages called osteoclasts. Osteoclasts reside in the skeletal tissue and are responsible for breaking down and recycling old bones. Now, estrogen turns down osteoclast activity. However, following menopause, lowered estrogen levels cause these macrophages to maintain their activity, breaking down bone faster than it is rebuilt. This is one of the factors in the progression of osteoporosis. Lower testosterone levels in elderly men also causes increase in inflammatory markers. There are other factors such as smoking and sleep disorders that cause increase in inflammatory markers, but for now, I want to focus your attention on the role of the excess blood glucose on inflammation. When glucose is properly utilized, our cells produce energy efficiently. So as cellular sensitivity to insulin diminishes, excess glucose accumulates in our bloodstream. So it's kind of like spilled gasoline. Excess blood glucose creates a highly combustible environment from which oxidative and inflammatory fires chronically erupt. Excess glucose not used for energy production converts to triglyceride that are either stored as unwanted body fat or accumulate in the blood where they contribute to the formation of plaque. As an aging human, we face a daily onslaught of excess glucose that poses a grave risk to our health and longevity. Surplus glucose relentlessly reacts with your body's proteins, causing damaging glycation reactions while fueling the fires of chronic inflammation and inflaming the production of destructive free radicals. Now, the term glycation is a buzzword that you will hear more and more nowadays. It is already known that excess sugar can lead to a variety of health concerns, but what most forget is that too much sugar can also affect the skin. Let's talk about that. Sugar can be digested in many forms, including the consumption of carbohydrates, and can even be formed by meal preparation. If there is too much sugar in the body, protein molecules can cross-link with sugar molecules. Once this cross-linking process has occurred, the new sugar proteins are called advanced glycation end products. Let's call them in a form of let's call them AGEs, stand for advanced glycation end products. The human body does not recognize AGEs as normal and will produce antibodies that cause inflammation in the skin. Once formed, AGEs tend to gravitate towards dermal collagen and elastin. Now, as people age, proteins in the body can become damaged throughout the introduction of these AGEs molecule, which is one of the key factors in aging of the skin. The more sugar you eat, whether processed or natural, the more AGEs are produced. When the body is overwhelmed with AGEs molecules, collagen becomes compromised. Effects of the glycation process at the cellular level of the skin's structure may result in wrinkling, loss of elasticity, stiffness, accelerated aging, and compromised barrier function. Other conditions that appear when microcirculation is damaged and cell turnover slows is a loss of volume in the face due to redistribution of fat. So, how can we avert glycation? You already might know the answer, and that is metabolizing glucose efficiently, which is the foundation concept behind bracial lean coffee. Unroasted coffee beans, once purified and standardized, produce high level of chlorogenic acid and other beneficial polyphenols that can suppress excess blood glucose level. As I have discussed before, human clinical trials support the role of chlorogenic acid in promoting healthy blood sugar control and reducing disease risks. Here I want to share with you the results of the latest research on chlorogenic acid and its mechanism of action on the other bodily function. Of course, again, when I'm talking about chlorogenic acids here, I'm not talking about any products out there in the market. It has to contain all the forms of chlorogenic acids which I had discussed before. So let's talk about the effect of chlorogenic acid on weight loss. So chlorogenic acid, along with other polyphenolic compounds in green coffee bean extract, acts synergistically with caffeine to suppress body weight gain and visceral fat accumulation. It seems the chlorogenic acids and caffeine works together in reducing abdominal fat by increasing lipolysis or fat cells being opened up for energy release. Chlorogenic acid also slows down glucose absorption. In previous discussions, I mentioned that chlorogenic acid inhibits an enzyme that triggers new glucose formation and glucose release by the liver. This enzyme involved in dangerous postprandial spikes in blood sugar. Now, simultaneously, it reduces the absorption of the total amount of carbohydrate absorbed from food by acting on inhibiting another enzyme which breaks starches down into glucose. So, reducing the rate at which this enzyme functions can reduce the amount of carbohydrate which winds up in the bloodstream as glucose. This is of significant benefits for those suffering from type 2 diabetes or insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome. 2 servings of lean will provide you with the clinical dose of chlorogenic acids as well as the chromium supplementation, which also help to support glucose metabolism, reduce oxidative stress, and increase insulin sensitivity. Remember, we talked about the oxidative stress as related to chronic inflammation. So, what are the other physiological benefits of taking chlorogenic acids? It increases uptake of glucose in muscle tissue. I mentioned that glucose by itself is very dangerous to roam around in the blood circulation. However, there is a specific protein transporter in the blood that gives a ride to glucose to the muscle tissue. Kind of like glucose is taking a boat ride to the muscle tissue. Chlorogenic acid increases the utilization of blood glucose in muscle by stimulating this glucose transporter, which works with insulin to transport glucose into the cells, muscle cells. Also, the research indicates that chlorogenic acid roles of it in protection against Alzheimer's disease and nerve degeneration. Neurodegenerative disorders, including Alzheimer's disease, are strongly associated with oxidative stress to nerve cells. These nerve cells called neurons. This oxidative damage is caused by reactive oxygen species, including hydrogen peroxide. Now, some population studies have linked moderate coffee consumption with a reduced risk of neurodegenerative diseases, and laboratory studies have begun to confirm that chlorogenic acid is one of the agents responsible for this protective effect. Chlorogenic acid protects neurons from hydrogen peroxide-induced stress through an upregulating of an antioxidant enzyme, as well as the suppressing inflammation in the neurons. The latest studies also indicate the role of chlorogenic acid in controlling blood pressure. Most individuals assume that coffee of any type will increase your blood pressure. Green coffee bean extract seems to be just the opposite. Some studies indicate the use of green coffee bean extract might reduce blood pressure and prevent the onset of high blood pressure for those that consume green coffee bean extract. As you know, I have mentioned in different occasions that inflammation is the mother of most diseases. Let me give you, without going into any details, give me some examples behind some diseases associated with inflammation. Of course, you know, cardiovascular disease is the first one, even cancer, because of the damage to the DNA. Diabetes, age-related macular degeneration, chronic kidney disease, osteoporosis, depression, cognitive declines, and others, you know. So one of the things is that chronic inflammation is generally not treated on its own by mainstream physicians. Interventions in conventional medicine are usually only undertaken when the inflammation occurs in association with another medical condition, such as, for example, arthritis. Currently, conventional preventive medical approaches to inflammation are limited to the use of CRP, which is the inflammation marker. It stands for C-reactive protein, to predict cardiovascular disease in high-risk subjects. And the preventive healthcare measures, such as the use of drugs like aspirin to inhibit the inflammatory cascades linked to thrombosis. But indeed, the potentially asymptomatic nature of low-grade inflammation is such that elevations of pro-inflammatory cytokines may progress undetected for some time and only being discovered after they have had time to cause enough cellular damage to produce disease symptoms. So here are some suggestions to make simple changes in your diet, along with taking your Bracia products regularly, because what you eat may fan or put out the fires of inflammation. All right, let's have some fun here also. First, get an oil change. Swap saturated and trans fats for olive oil, which has potent anti-inflammatory properties. Or use polyunsaturated fat. Eat more fish, especially those with omega-3 fatty acids. Don't be so refined. The increase of blood sugar that accompanies a meal or snack of a highly refined carbohydrates, such as white bread, white rice, French fries, sugar-laden soda, etc., increases levels of inflammatory messengers, cytokines. Eating whole grain bread, for example, brown rice and other whole grains smooth out the after-meal rise in blood sugar and insulin and dampen cytokines production. Eat more fruits. The more fruit and vegetables you eat, the lower the burden of inflammation. Why? They contain hundreds, perhaps thousands of substances that squelch inflammation-rousing free radicals. Some act as a direct anti-inflammatory agents. And go nuts. Adding walnuts, peanuts, almonds, and other nuts and seeds to your snacks and meals is another tasty way to ease inflammation. Good news for cocoa lovers. In laboratory studies, cocoa and dark chocolate slows the production of signaling molecules involved in chronic inflammation. However, the trick is to get them without too much sugar and fat. And take alcohol in moderation. A drink a day seems to lower level of C-reactive protein, a powerful signal of inflammation. Too much alcohol has the opposite effect on CRP. And add spice to your life. Herbs and spices such as turmeric, ginger, garlic, basil, pepper, and many others have anti-inflammatory properties. If you adopt an anti-inflammatory diet, you probably won't see or feel any different. Angina won't suddenly disappear or heart failure reverse itself. But you will be doing your heart, arteries, and the rest of you a huge favor that will pay off in many ways. Be faithful to your Bracia products. And with that, I wish you a restful evening and a good night's sleep.